What's going on, guys? Vulkan here, and today we are talking about the brand new update that just hit the PTR yesterday for New World. So we have a lot to talk about, and some of it good, some of it bad, but let's go ahead and let's dive in and talk about what the PTR brought us, because this one is all about expeditions, endgame, increasing our max gear score, and making life very difficult for those of us who want life to be more difficult. So let's talk about some of the stuff that got added. So the biggest update for the PTR is something called mutators. Now, mutators are modifiers for expeditions within New World. Now, this affects every expedition, and these are something you opt into. So it's not like something that's going to be there whether you like it or not. You can still do the regular version of your expeditions, but now you can do something that is very difficult and gives you almost like a ladder to climb. So let's talk about mutators. So what are mutators? Mutators are these modifiers, and these modifiers are very different and they make life very difficult. So the way these work is that you need to clear the regular version of an expedition first, and you need to be at least gear score 600. At that point, you can unlock Mutation 1. Now, Mutation 1 will add one mutator to the expedition, and as you grind your way through all of the different mutated ranks, all the way up until 10, you're going to continue to add on mutators until you reach 3. Now, this doesn't seem like much, right? You're 3, what's happening? 3 is not very many. But here's the deal. Each mutator adds a handful of buffs to enemies. So it's not like you're just going to see one change. You're going to see multiple changes and have multiple things to deal with. So for instance, right now, Dynasty Shipyards is being augmented with Eternal on Mutated 1. So that's the name of the mutator, is called Eternal. Now, this is a mutator that adds some pretty nasty stuff to almost every enemy in the expedition. So first up, you have something called Creeping, which causes enemies to cast a spell on death, empowering all enemies around them. So when you kill them, they empower everything else around them. Then you have Oblivion, which causes enemies to apply Leech on hit, which is going to deal void damage over time to you and then heal that enemy over time. So that makes life a little bit more difficult because enemies will not be dying as quickly. Then they're also going to have Void Resistance. Then they have something called Abyssal, which causes them to deal extra void damage. And then lastly, we have Paranoid. Now, Paranoid is rough, right? So enemies are going to apply building stacks whenever they're hit. And then at 4 stacks, they're going to deal AoE void damage and apply a dot to you. So let me just say, I've been through quite a few of these so far. These are rough, especially Paranoid. Because if you aren't watching your stacks and you get hit by that void AoE, one, it hits you for a huge amount, but then it applies a stacking dot that will lop off a ton of health at a super fast pace. Like, it's every single tick, it took 1/4 of my health away. So I had to make sure to, 1, avoid that void AoE, which in turn caused me to avoid the dot. And if I managed to get hit, I needed to have a potion ready, I needed to have some healing ready, something needed to happen or else I would have died. So that's something to keep in mind. So these do make life pretty hard. So like I said, keep an eye on those Paranoid stacks. Pause your attack when you get close to 4 stacks. That way they fall off and then you can continue doing DPS. Otherwise, you just need to keep moving to avoid that AoE. So it's something that you can avoid it pretty simply, but when you're shooting a bow, a musket, or something like that, or you have a bunch of people stacked up around the boss, this makes life pretty hard. Now, Oblivion and Creeping are also a very nasty combo because this whole mutator thing is all about time and clearing the expedition quickly. And if you aren't able to finish under the time limit, you get severely penalized. So we're gonna go ahead and let's talk about that really quick. So these mutated expeditions require you to rack up points. You have to hit a certain threshold of points in order to unlock subsequent mutated ranks. So for instance, if you want to unlock Mutated 2, you need to score 20,000 points on Mutated 1, which is not an easy thing to do. When we first cleared it, we had 1,500 points. Now, here's the deal. We cleared it with like 6,000 points. But because we did not hit that time limit, we were penalized and we ended up having 4,000 points removed off of our total score, which was crazy. So how do you get points, right? How do you rack these things up? What are the different ways you can do this? Well, there are multiple ways. You need to kill named enemies, regular enemies, beat the timer, and avoid death. If you die multiple times or you experience a team wipe, you lose a ton of points. I'm talking a ton of points. And if you wipe, you probably won't make it because you lost time, you lost whatever points you had accumulated up to that point. And as time goes down, so does your bonus, your modifier, right? So you'll see like ×4, ×3 of your total score. So if you get to the end and you have 5,000 points ×4, then that's 20,000 points and you'll end up clearing it and being able to unlock Mutated 2. But if you don't do it quickly enough, then that kind of bonus roll will go down. So you'll have ×4 and then ×3 and then ×2. And at that point, you're not going to have enough to actually clear anything. So here are some things to kind of make life a little bit easier for you. So one, don't skip enemies. Don't avoid fights. That's going to cause issues. So the best method we've kind of put together is take things slow and steady, focus all of your attacks on your single targets. Don't try to push or rush, right? You're just going to end up aggroing too many enemies and end up dying multiple times, which will completely nuke your score. And at that point, you might as well just quit and restart. Now, once you clear the expedition, whether you had enough points or not, you do get a participation prize. You're going to be given umbral shards, and these are used to empower your gear up to the new gear score of 625. And now 625 is needed to clear the higher level mutations, so there will be a grind associated with this, but these umbral shards are incredibly important. Now, the cool thing is, as you clear higher level mutations, you'll be given more umbral shards. When you clear a mutated 1, you get something like 37. And then if you clear like a mutated 2, you get 80. So they go up pretty fast, and then you can use those to upgrade your gear. Now, there are different ways to get umbral shards. It's not like you only have to get them through mutated expeditions. You can also get them through gypsum casts, or you can get them when you craft a 600 gear score item. And that item slot has to be at least 600 expertise. So you can't craft a 600 item being at like 590 and then get umbral shards. You have to have at least 600 expertise for that particular slot. So guys, overall, I've cleared these mutations a handful of times, and I do have some thoughts after going through and kind of experiencing a bunch of this stuff. Is this a solid change? What's going to be coming to the table? Is this going to be something that once it hits live servers, will it bring a bunch of people back? Will people enjoy it? Let's talk about that. So first up, I do think this is a good addition. I do think it gives players some more end game stuff to do, especially in an instanced format. So right now, end game expeditions aren't exactly amazing. I mean, once you do them a few times, they become super boring. They're scripted, they're played out. So having something extra like this will bring some incentives to rerunning that content. Even though it isn't different kind of mechanically, it does add some extra difficulty to keep you awake and aware. Now, secondly, you do need a mutated orb in order to access these expeditions, which means you need to grind out even more materials and just to access this new content. And this is where I'm getting worn out, right? I understand they want to make these kind of something to work towards, but because the materials are rare, the cooldown timers are long, you aren't able to make enough of these quickly enough to really get people excited about the new content. People will do it once or twice, but when they need to kind of continuously grind just to play the game, that's going to drive more people away. I would really like to see them either get rid of the mutated orbs completely and just have this as something optional, because right now you have to clear the expedition by itself, which I think is a okay gate, right? You have to be able to do it without going in to do a mutated one right out of the gate. But you also have to have gear score 600, which is a grind in itself. You have to have a build that's going to be good enough to overcome mutated, which means you're going to have RNG on your side. You can't just take and throw a whole bunch of random weapons and armor together and have a good time. That's not going to work. So you have to RNG grind to get your build going. And then once that's all done, then you have to go grind the orb itself to get into the expedition. And now you have to have a mutated orb in order to do the mutated expedition. So to me, it's such a long grind, and it's such a huge hill to climb in order to access this content. And a lot of people aren't going to be able to right out of the gate. There's a lot of people that are not at gear score 600, myself included. So this isn't something that I can get jived about because I can't access it, and it's going to be something that I'll just have to eventually get to at some point in time. So that's something that I really think they need to take a step back and look at. And they're introducing all of these kind of time gates, all of these grind gates, and is it truly the healthiest thing for New World right now? Now, lastly, the difficulty of the mutations is fine. I love the difficulty. I like that this is hard content and it's stuff that you need to be aware of. There are things like the paranoid where you actually have to kind of keep an eye on your dot stacking, or your debuff stacking rather. So there's a lot that goes into it. I love that. However, we've seen how time trials work out in other games. You have instances where they're poorly implemented, like in Outriders, and you have instances where they are like moderately implemented, I'll say. Some people love them, some people hate them, in like World of Warcraft. Now, time trials aren't exactly exciting or fun when you're racing against a clock in order to progress or unlock additional content, right? That's something that a lot of people don't really enjoy. And if you're not able to beat the clock, then you're severely punished. It's just not, it's not fun, it's not exciting, it's just frustrating. And I think people are really going to have a problem with that. I know, we ran through Dynasty shipyards like 3 or 4 times on Mutated 1 before we were finally able to clear it under the time limit. And did it feel good? Not really, to be honest with you. It was just one of those things like, oh gosh, okay, now we're done with that. Let's go to Mutated 2. Oh man, now we have another timer that we have to beat, and we have to go grind Mutated 1 and then do it again and again and again in order to get Umbral Shards, in order to upgrade our gear, and then take that upgraded gear into Mutated 2. And it wasn't a fun process when you're constantly racing against the clock. If it was clear it with a certain score and the score wasn't so heavily angled towards the timer, then that would be fine. But I think right now, the way they kind of have this thing weighted, it's not going to last very long with this particular setup. I think here in maybe a month or two, we're going to be seeing some patch notes come out talking about how the timer has been adjusted to be less impactful. So that's really everything that kind of came with the mutated expeditions, the Umbral Shards, all of that. But we do have some additional things that came with this PTR that are going to make people super happy. So the biggest one, they lowered the fast travel costs, which is amazing. They went in and they changed the distance travel costs and made those incredibly low. That way you can fast travel for much, much cheaper, which is awesome. Because again, that was something that a lot of people complained about, myself included. And it just felt like you were so punished and penalized for wanting to fast travel. Now, number 2, they've increased the drop rates for named enemies in expeditions. And this is something that I can literally say is very noticeable. I got 4 or 5 legendary items that were 600 gear score in 3 or 4 runs of Dynasty shipyards. I was able to get 3 legendaries in 1 run, and then 1 or 2 legendaries in the additional 2 or 3 runs. So it was pretty crazy. Some of those I was even able to equip right away because they were better than my playtester gear. And then also they changed the way that expertise works for purchased items. So if you purchase an item through the trading post or player-to-player trading, that item will have its expertise scaled down to the midpoint of your expertise. So for instance, if your expertise is 500 and you buy a 600 gear score item, the item itself will scale down to 550 gear score instead of 600. I'm not entirely sure if this is to like combat people getting access to gear score 600 level items when their expertise isn't close to that, but to me, the scaling isn't really there, and it's not like it really has a long-term effect. So maybe it's just to make things a little bit more manageable. I'm not entirely sure, but just be aware that as you go through and you buy things, whether it's an alt or maybe you're not at 600 yet, that your items will be scaled down. And lastly, they made a big change to the PvP damage formula. Now, this is something that a lot of people have been asking for, but I've also seen a lot of very good counter arguments for this. So they changed the way that the PvP damage formula scales to make lower level players deal more damage to higher level players, and higher level players deal less damage to lower level players, to make it more of a skill-based kind of fight rather than me walking up as a 60 and then one popping a level 20. So that's something to keep in mind as you go through and as you're kind of interacting or wanting to do world PvP. Lower level players are going to be able to kind of hold their own against level 60s, so ganking might not be as prevalent. I'm not entirely sure. Open world PvP isn't something I get into too often, but that's something to keep in mind, especially for those of you who want to go out and do some ganking. So guys, that is everything kind of substance that came with our January PTR. The biggest thing, again, are those mutators for expeditions and umbral shards. Let me know in the comment section below what you all think. Is this something you're really excited about? Have you full cleared? What's the highest mutation you've got to so far? But as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you next time.